So imagine this. It's the summer of 1940. Just a few short weeks ago, the world you knew, the confident, free France, felt solid, immovable. Now it's collapsing like a house of cards. The German army, the Wehrmacht, has swept in with a speed and ferocity no one truly anticipated. The famed Maginot Line, a symbol of French defense, was outflanked. Paris, the city of light, falls silent, surrendered to spare it from destruction. This isn't just a military defeat, it's a profound, soul-crushing shock to the French psyche. For generations, France has been a major European power, a beacon of culture and liberty. Now, the unthinkable has happened. The streets, usually bustling with life and laughter, are filled with the unfamiliar sound of German boots marching in perfect, chilling rhythm. The swastika, a symbol of hatred and conquest, flies over government buildings, a constant, ugly reminder of the new reality. The first few weeks are pure chaos and uncertainty. Millions of French citizens, terrified and desperate, had fled their homes, clogging the roads in what became known as the Exode, the Exodus. They feared the invading army, the stories of brutality echoing from other conquered lands. When the armistice is signed, splitting France into a vast German-occupied zone in the north and west and the so-called Free Zone, governed by the collaborationist Vichy regime in the south, a trickle of refugees begins to return to their shattered homes. Life instantly changes. Curfews are imposed. German soldiers, often polite but always armed and in control, are everywhere. They commandeer the best hotels, the finest apartments, the essential resources. The French are now second-class citizens in their own country. The most immediate and constant presence of the occupation is the subtle, pervasive fear. Every conversation must be guarded. A careless word in a cafe, a frustrated outburst in the street could lead to a knock on the door, arrest, or worse. The atmosphere is heavy with suspicion. Friends eye friends, neighbors watch neighbors. The economic reality bites hard and fast. Germany sets the exchange rate to hugely favor the Reichsmark, essentially draining the French economy dry. Food, fuel, clothing, everything becomes scarce. Ration cards are introduced. Complex systems of coupons dictating how much bread, meat, or sugar a family can buy. The lines for meager rations stretch around the block. People become experts at System D, the art of improvisation, making do and finding things on the black market, a risky but often necessary gamble to keep your family fed. This black market, or marché noir, quickly grows into a parallel economy, creating immense inequality, where those with connections or money could feast, while the ordinary people slowly starved. The occupation wasn't a static thing, it was a slow, creeping poison. In the beginning, some held on to a naive hope that it would be short-lived, that the British would push them out, or that a counterattack would materialize. But as the months dragged on, that hope began to fade, replaced by a grim, exhausting determination to simply survive. The German machine was efficient, organized, and utterly relentless in its goal to exploit France for the war effort. This wasn't just about control, it was about resources, labor, and the complete subjugation of a proud nation. This sets the stage for everything that follows: the rise of resistance, the moral compromises, and the daily battle for dignity in a world stripped of its freedom. The stage is set. The silence is broken by the sound of jackboots, and the story of occupied France has truly begun.
The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a monotonous, grinding routine of la vie quotidienne, daily life, under constant surveillance. Imagine waking up knowing your destiny is dictated by a foreign power. Every single aspect of life is controlled: the time you must be indoors, the programs you can listen to on the radio, the topics you dare not discuss in public. The French press and media were, of course, heavily censored and controlled by German propaganda, churning out endless stories about the greatness of the Third Reich and the inevitable defeat of the Allies. Listening to the BBC, the voice of General de Gaulle and Free France, was a criminal act, often done in the dead of night with a blanket over the radio to muffle the sound, a small, defiant act of clinging to the truth. The greatest daily struggle was simply keeping warm and fed. The lack of coal meant frigid winters, forcing families to burn whatever they could find. Food scarcity led to desperate innovation. French cuisine, famed the world over, became a sad shadow of itself. Butter was replaced by margarine, coffee by roasted barley, and vegetables like potatoes and turnips became the mainstays. People developed a deep, almost spiritual connection to their bicycles, as gasoline was almost non-existent. These bicycles became the lifelines of the occupied country, used to pedal miles into the countryside, hoping to trade an item, a piece of jewelry, a family heirloom, for a handful of eggs or a piece of cheese from a farmer. This was the famous Système D in action, the ingenuity born of necessity. This hardship and repression, however, also started to sow the seeds of defiance. You couldn't control the minds and hearts of a whole nation indefinitely. The initial shock began to crystallize into anger and a quiet, steely determination to fight back. This is where the resistance truly began, not as a unified army, but as small, fragmented acts of rebellion. It started simply, drawing a V for victory on a German poster, refusing to give up your seat to a German soldier, or subtly misdirecting the occupation forces when asked for directions. These small gestures were morale boosters, little sparks of courage that let people know they weren't alone. As the months turned into years, these sparks coalesced. Students, railway workers, intellectuals, and communists began to organize into Maquis, groups operating in the countryside and mountains, and résistance in the cities. Their work was incredibly dangerous. They produced and distributed underground newspapers, small pamphlets filled with real news and messages of hope. They established escape lines, helping downed Allied airmen and persecuted Jews cross the border into neutral Spain. They gathered vital intelligence on German troop movements, fortifications, and industrial production, relaying it to London via precarious wireless transmissions, a task that almost guaranteed capture and execution if discovered. The German response to any act of resistance was brutal and swift. For every German soldier killed, 10, 50, or even 100 innocent French civilians might be executed in retaliation. This policy of collective punishment forced the resistance to operate in the deepest shadows, placing an enormous moral burden on their shoulders. Did a successful act of sabotage justify the inevitable horrific reprisals against the local population? This was the terrible dilemma faced by every man and woman who chose to fight. They lived with the constant shadow of the Gestapo, the German secret police, whose network of informants and brutal interrogation methods were designed to crush the will to resist. The choice was clear: collaboration or resistance. And for those who chose to resist, their life became a constant, silent battle for France's soul, a testament to the enduring human spirit that refuses to be completely extinguished by tyranny.
As 1943 bled into 1944, the atmosphere in occupied France began to shift dramatically. The tide of the war was turning, and everyone, from the most devout resistor to the most pragmatic collaborator, could feel it. The constant drain of French resources and labor was intensified by the German demand for service du travail obligatoire, or STO, mandatory labor service. Hundreds of thousands of young Frenchmen were conscripted and sent to work in German factories. For many young men, this was the final straw. Instead of boarding the train to Germany, they fled to the countryside, swelling the ranks of the Maquis, the rural resistance fighters. The Maquis went from being small, isolated bands to a significant military force, albeit poorly armed, preparing for the day they would be called upon to rise. The Gestapo and the collaborationist French police tightened their grip in response. Raids and arrests became more frequent, and the brutality escalated. The price of resistance was now almost guaranteed death or deportation to the horrific concentration and labor camps in the East. Yet, paradoxically, the danger only seemed to harden the resolve of the French people. They saw the end in sight, and the need to contribute to their own liberation became paramount. Sabotage attacks on German rail lines and communication networks multiplied, making the German war effort on the Western Front increasingly difficult. The whole country held its breath. Whispers of an imminent invasion, a massive landing by the Allies, filled the air. Radio broadcasts from London became even more cryptic, filled with coded messages, poetry, seemingly random phrases that the resistance groups were primed to recognize as commands to mobilize. A famous example was a line from a poem, "The long sobs of the violins of autumn." This was the signal. When D-Day finally arrived on June 6, 1944, the joy was mixed with terror. The massive Allied landings in Normandy were the beginning of the end, but they also triggered a ferocious German counter-response. For the next few months, France became a battlefield. The resistance rose up, often fighting pitched battles against retreating German forces, securing bridges and slowing down the movement of German reinforcements towards the invasion front. Cities and towns that dared to celebrate too early paid a terrible price, suffering massacres and destruction. But the momentum was unstoppable. When the Allies finally approached Paris in August 1944, the local resistance initiated an uprising, seizing control of key buildings and engaging the German garrison. This act of defiance allowed the Free French 2nd Armored Division, led by General Leclerc, to be the first Allied unit to enter the city, ensuring that France liberated its own capital, a moment of profound national pride. The 4 years of occupation left deep, complex scars. The joy of the liberation, the ecstatic crowds cheering the Allied soldiers and the Maquis was undeniable, but it was quickly followed by a difficult period of reckoning. Collaborators, both those who actively served the enemy and those who simply profited from the regime, were rounded up, sometimes subjected to spontaneous, violent justice. France was free, but it was also exhausted, morally scarred, and utterly transformed. The occupation had forced an entire generation to make impossible choices, testing the limits of human endurance, morality, and hope. It is a story not just of war, but of the silent, daily heroism of ordinary people who simply refused to let the darkness win. And that is the enduring echo of the French occupation. Thank you so much for listening to this deep dive into life in German-occupied France. We truly appreciate you sticking with us through this difficult but vital history. If this story resonated with you and you appreciate the effort we put into bringing these battle echoes to light, please take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel to make sure you don't miss our next historical journey, and importantly, let us know in the comment section below. What other untold stories from World War II or any other conflict would you like us to cover? Were there any personal stories or anecdotes from this period that you've heard? Share them with us. Your engagement fuels this channel. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next one.